Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 197. So close to 200. That is PEP or Planet Extra podcast. I am the host of Planet America on ABC Australia, but this is not an official podcast of the ABCs. Repeat, not an official podcast. But on PEP, we do cover all the stuff that is too nerdy for TV. Any TV. I don't care what TV. We're too nerdy for it. If you're listening, you can find us on YouTube at the PEP with Chaz and Dr. Dave channel, and you can also see highlights on the PEP Clips YouTube channel. You also find timestamps and show notes in our blurbs, and if you leave a comment under our current episode video, we are likely to see it. You can also tweet us or blue sky us at PEPCaSDRDAVE. That's at PepChazDrDave. If you want to chat to some fellow peppers, you can join our Discord server. It's on the screen now or in the blurb of the podcast. If you want to contact me or Lockie the Lucky privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. That address again is producer@pepthepodcast.com. I have been a little bit slack replying to those recently, but I am going to be doing a special PEP correspondence from the emails very, very soon. And I'll start replying to a few of them as well. But for now, let's turn to the lady who simply would not dream of raising the stakes on inconsequential views. I'm talking, of course, about journalist extraordinaire, Elle Hardy. Hello, Elle.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Elle, why don't you tell the peppers where they can find you and your work? Because I always forget to ask you at the end of the episode.
Well, I mean, look, to be honest, my work's in something of a hiatus at the moment because I'm writing a book this year. But I have a website, ellehardy.com, which I try to update when I put new stuff up. And these days I'm mostly on Blue Sky at Elle Hardy. And yeah, just trying not to be on social media a whole lot. But Blue Sky, occasionally Twitter, trying to just be a responsible person and be a bit less online.
You are an inspiration to me. I am only 23 hours a day more online than you. Elle, why don't you kick us off by telling us what you're grateful for?
Okay, I am grateful for Scrim, the Houdini hound of our hearts. So this is a
you have to explain every word you just said.
It's a little terrier in New Orleans who's kind of become famous and is sort of the center of a lot of Mardi Gras floats for this year's carnival. So he ran away from a caravan park in Halloween 2023. Oh, sorry, he was picked up in a caravan park in another city near here called Homer. And he was on death row shelter, unfortunately. And an animal rescue lady in New Orleans came and picked him up and took him in. And immediately he escaped. He found like the one, it's like, Jurassic Park where the T-Rex is like going around testing the vulnerability in the fence. So he found the one vulnerability in her fence and got out. And then he kind of captivated the city's attention because he evaded a professional dog catcher that they brought in from Texas. He was like shot him with tranquilizer darts and still managed to get away. People started chasing him with large butterfly nets. So he became a bit of a hero. And then he was recaptured towards the end of last year. And he was, sort of rehomed. And I don't think he had the best start to life, but, they helped sort of re-socialize him with people and then try to rehome him. And there's a great video online. You can look up Scrim, Scrim, just escaping. And he bit through someone's fly screen on the second floor of their house, jumped out of the second floor, and you can just see the ring cam of this dog just go, Ew! And then got away again. So he was on the run for months. And because America's just sort of, everyone just has ring cameras on their front doors and the surveillance cameras everywhere, he was constantly being captured around the city. And people just constantly seeing him everywhere, but he just constantly evaded human capture. But he actually, someone finally got a hold of him the other day. And so he's in perfect health. The last time he was found, he had 2 gunshot wounds. He'd had like missing teeth and ear, it's probably not the best, the best city for, sort of a street dog to live on the streets. But he was in such good health when they recaptured him last week that he'd even gained weight. So yeah, he's just kind of captured the heart of the city and now of the nation. And yeah, as I mentioned, he's kind of the star of Mardi Gras this year. So all hail Scrim.
Wow. He'll have nothing to escape from this time, will he? That's good. He's the king. All the treats
He is the king.
all the treats he can down. I didn't know
That's
anything about
right.
Scrim. For those who don't know, Elle lives in New Orleans, hence Scrim. But, look, well, I'm grateful for I didn't get a chance to write this down because you'll be shocked to hear I ran out of time to finish my preparation. For those who don't know this thing, I never finish preparation, but I especially don't finish preparation when it's Monday night. And I recorded another pod on Friday. But so
Are you going to tell people what time it actually is in Sydney right now?
Right now, it is currently 2:29 a.m. So it's going to be a long night. Elle said to me, I think I need to keep this to 2 hours. And I was like, you know what? That's fine by me. No protests here. But, anyway, what my completely unprepared grateful is for someone who I've mentioned before on the pod, Kevin Drum. Kevin Drum is kind of my hero blogger. He's one of the original bloggers way back in the day at the turn of the century. And he's kind of I've told you guys about him before. He's kind of this techno kind of graphy, data-driven sort of blogger. He's a liberal kind of, but not really liberal. Like he pisses off liberals a lot because he tends to argue. He's ornery and he argues with his own kind, and he always brings the receipts, which annoys people. But I love him. I love everything about him. He's always got the data. He's obsessed with the graph. And I've mentioned him before in the context of the fact that he has multiple myeloma and he's had it for some time and he is basically dying. And he's still blogging. Doesn't matter. It just doesn't stop him. But the last week or so has been a fairly nerve-wracking time because he one day just didn't blog. And he usually blogs 10 times a day. And he just didn't blog for one day. And that was unusual. But, I thought, oh, well, the man doesn't have to blog. I understand. Then the next day, he just had one health update about the fact that he wasn't feeling great at the moment and that he'd try and blog more in the coming days. And that was it. And then the day after that, we saw this blog. And for those who are listening, this entire blog was fading fast, pneumonia worse, ventilator next, not looking good, take care of Donald Trump for me. And that was not easy reading. And I was grateful for one of the Peppers who in the comments actually said wished Kevin Drum well, so it was nice to know someone else was looking out for him as well, because he's not super popular. He's not a commercial success, but he's just fantastic. And it looks like he is getting better. In the subsequent days, he's been a little more articulate, and he's even blogging a little bit semi-normally again. So we might have him for a little while yet, but the day's coming, and I'm just grateful we've got him for at least a few more months. Fingers crossed. So get better, Kevin. And I know he might be the only person who's not a Pepper, because I know he's too busy reading to be listening to Pep. But this one's for you, mate. Okay, so let's do some correspondences. Now these are only Elle relevant correspondences. We have 2 correspondences that were just for you because I mentioned that you were coming on the show, and so some people put out some correspondences that are relevant to you. And let me just for those wondering, we've got Melina coming up on Thursday. So if you have a Melina specific correspondence, you're welcome to throw that in as well. And Richie and Bill aren't too far behind either. They're in the next couple of weeks. But first of all, Elle, I actually, because I didn't prepare properly, I don't have the person's name here, but there was someone who was asking about Curse Yarvin. Oh yeah, Matt. Matt says, I heard Dr. Dave mention Curtis Yarvin several times during the last podcast, but I don't remember you ever having mentioned him before. A troubling amount of my time thinking about this subject revolves around this guy and his toxic ideas. Would you be able to do a little dive on him and his connection to the current US administration if you deem it relevant? If you don't, I'd also like to hear that too. Matt said, now, Matt didn't even know that was a special Elle correspondence, but it was because no one knows more about this fellow than you. When I asked you, Elle, if you were happy to take this, you rolled your eyes and you said, ugh. So I take that as a yes. Elle, tell us all about Curtis Yarvin.
Okay, well, I mean, look, I will start by saying there are some people who do know a lot more about him than I do, and I'd recommend Robert Evans has done a lot of work on him. Australia's own Jason Wilson, who reports on the far right for the US Guardian, has been following him for a very long time. And also James Pogue wrote a really good feature on Peter Thiel and his kind of ecosystem for Vanity Fair a year or two ago. So I'd recommend checking all those guys out if you want to know more on him. Robert Evans' podcast Behind the Bastards did like a 2-part special on him. But yes,
Elle, if
Yarvin
you
has...
send me those details, I'll put them in the homework so everyone can see them and link, okay?
Yeah, sure, will do.
Yeah.
So Yarvin is basically considered to be the originator of the neo-reactionary, or what's also known as the Dark Enlightenment movement. And he sort of started blogging in 2007. So he's quite a forerunner to, when you think about, I suppose, the Tea Party, the alt-right, all those sort of guys. He was really pushing a lot of these ideas much earlier. And so a lot of people in the movement have looked up to him. He was originally an anonymous blogger called Mencius Moldbug, and then his identity, I think, was revealed a few years ago. And I suppose his relevance is that, I mean, you can see his paw prints all over JD Vance's stuff, and really what we're seeing in Trump too. If a lot of people think, I guess, that sort of Bannon was a lot of the author of, I suppose Bannon and Steve Miller were really very influential in Trump 1, and Bannon's certainly been influenced by Yarvin as well. What we're seeing now, particularly with Vance and a lot of this, the new agenda, the new and a lot of the new language and shibboleths and things like that, you can really trace a lot of them back to Yarvin at the moment. So what he believes in is a kind of techno monarchy, where you sort of have one man who is like a CEO king, and that's the solution to what he considers to be the failed experiment of liberal democracy. And a really big thing, which we'll also see in our other correspondence piece after this, is this idea that's becoming really powerful in conservative and far-right circles, is that liberal democracy is decadent and depraved. And that so many of the cultural problems that we're seeing, particularly, in the United States, but also globally, are coming from the problems of liberal democracy, which sows the seeds of its own destruction. So one of his really big ideas is this sort of tyrannical force that he calls the cathedral. And so it's this idea that academics and the liberal media in particular have formed this, sort of cultural tyranny that we're all living under. And again, a lot of this, there is an economic thread to this stuff, but a lot of it really comes back to cultural ideas, and that's what it was really, really interested in. And I mean, just as a taste of some of his stuff, and again, this guy's been blogging since 2007, so there is a lot of material out there to dig into. I mean, he has defended the institution of slavery. He's certainly done a bit of dabbling in race science. He does quite specifically say that while he understands white supremacy, he's not personally a white supremacist. But there's, he's not afraid to delve into some of these ideas. I mean, what he's basically doing is sort of repackaging a lot of the old reactionary folk devils that have been around for a long time. Conservatives and people on the right for a very long time have been saying, that academics are all sort of left-wing hippies, I suppose, that these institutions particularly have been captured by the left, that, that the media is inherently hostile to right-wing and conservative ideas. So he's really just sort of repackaging a lot of these ideas up. And I think where his power comes from, and to a lot of people, what's alarming about him is that he's really been able to package up a lot of these old ideas and sort of sell them to the tech libertarian class, who, when you think about a lot of the, whether it's just sort of young guys working in Silicon Valley, or even your Mark Zuckerbergs and Google executives and people like that, they, sort of started out, you think about the Obama era, where there was a real optimism about the future of tech, and that it was, ideas that it was going to be very democratic and liberating. And as we've sort of seen in the last few weeks, with all of the tech billionaires in particular getting on board with the new agenda of Trump and Musk, all the anti-DEI stuff, they're really embracing this, neo-reactionary conservative movement.
Can I just ask, what I don't understand is, okay, I get people saying, yeah, we've lost our way, society's decadent, it's just a mess, or that's been forever. People have always said that. So I understand that logic. What I don't understand is, therefore we need a techno king to write it. Like, I don't understand why they wouldn't go down the Jordan Peterson route of take responsibility for your own actions. If you're worried about society's morals, clean up your own morals. I don't understand why they need this giant authoritarian society to impact morals. Surely history tells us that monarchs don't improve people's morals.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I mean, look, ultimately what it always winds up coming down to, which is why he's so easily been able to get, people from all all sorts of, positions on the right, conservative, religious conservatives, libertarians, into the tent. It's still basically the same story, right? Involves slashing government. I mean, he invented the acronym RAGE, which is retire all government employees, which is, really the genesis of a lot of what we're seeing now with Musk's whole project. And it sort of is just sort of a Darwinian extreme self-reliance. So again, because they're so culturally, a lot of this stuff comes through with ideas about culture. So it is just, having this CEO king, Trump or Musk or whoever you want, making sure that, the clamping down on immigration, making sure that, drag queen story hour isn't happening and that sort of thing. So it's kind of keeping a lid on the culture while just saying, you've got to have a strong, get your family unit in order, get back to your church, do things in your community, and have this extreme self-reliance. It's, everyone's just got to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. So it really is it sort of comes back to your traditional right-wing messaging. It's just a very extreme version, and it comes at it from a more cultural angle.
And can I presume that all the tech CEOs who support him see themselves as a potential CEO king?
Yeah, look, it's not something I report on,
Yeah.
so I don't definitely know that, but he certainly has influence in the circles that a lot of these people are running in. So he's sort of got involved in recent years with the Claremont Institute,
Yeah.
which is a very far right think tank that's, I guess, sort of replaced the American Enterprise Institute as the kind of house think tank of the Republican Party and the right. So the AEI, is much more libertarian, much more free market, and obviously now that we're talking about tariffs and clamping down on migration and things like that, the Claremont Institute has come in and with Yarvin, and is pushing a lot more of these very reactionary, restrictive kind of right wing philosophy.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I look. All I know is what you've just told me, but it feels to me often. I don't want to comment on this in particular, but it feels to me often these kinds of philosophies tend to involve people who are pretty well off and doing pretty well for themselves, reducing the amount they need to worry about other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they seem to be a license. I am someone with a lot of libertarian philosophy, right? So I have no problem with libertarianism, But there is a certain kind of libertarian. There are different kinds of libertarians out there. There is a certain kind of libertarian who is a millionaire or a billionaire who just wants to be a king in their own domain and get the government off their back and get everyone else off their back so they can just be invincible as far as they're concerned and don't have to worry about anyone else whatsoever. And this strikes me as a philosophy that is conducive to that mindset. And that mindset, by the way, is an asshole's mindset. Like that you don't get, there's no poor people who think like that. It's people who feel entitled, who have had, look, they might have been hard workers. I'm not saying they're not hard workers. I'm not saying they didn't earn their money, but there's always an element of luck with success. Always. There's hard work. You don't like you sure, you need to work hard, but you also, there are people who work hard who don't get lucky as well. Right? And it's very tempting for people when they're successful to think, I deserve this. I am inherently a superior person to those who aren't successful. I earned this. I worked really hard and therefore I am better. And anything which allows those people to then not give two shits about the people that they regard as inferior, to not have to care what they think, to not have to take their thoughts into consideration, which democracy forces you to take their thoughts into consideration. But this techno-utopia might not. That's my guess. Like, I might be just talking shit here, but that's the vibe I'm getting at least. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. And I mean, I think, yeah, there is often that culture as well. It's, well, I managed to, to pull myself up and to create all of this. Everyone else should be able to as well. There is that, but it's almost contradictory then to the exceptionalism that I am special. But I think another real feature of this movement is the punitive nature and the desire to punish your enemies. It's not just to say, oh, these academics and journalists are bad and they're promoting bad ideas or whatever. It's, we want to make sure that they are, impoverished, that they don't have a job, that they feel threatened, that, people's names names of bureaucrats are being put online at the moment, and people can be harassed in their homes and things like that. So it's not just wanting for your ideology to win, it is wanting to punish people perceived as enemies. And I think that that Yarvin has really, with the idea of the cathedral and things like that, has really created the scaffolding for a lot of this movement to build itself around.
Okay. One of the things, I'm just going to do a quick just general correspondence for something I got, wrong last week. Kind of wrong, a little wrong, but we got more information. And then I think we'll go on to content and then come back to the other correspondence, just so we don't spend too long before we get into the week's news, especially given that the other one is relevant to the week's news anyway. There's just one topic which I got some clarifications on. That is, of all the topics last week, you never would have picked it. The penny. There I was trying to come up. I thought I saw, Trump's done something. Actually, I approve of here. I better cover that. That's because it's rare. And then, of course, I get a bunch of people saying, well, actually, so let me share with you. It's two Phillips. The Phillips are on top of this one. I suppose that the Prince Philip has always taken an interest in pennies, in sort of British currency. The American currency is close enough. Philip says, while on the face, and I'm not sure that was meant to be a pun, while on its face, getting rid of the penny is a great idea. In fact, you would need more nickels, 5-cent coins, and they are even more expensive than the penny. And he's screen capped that nickels cost 13.8 cents to make. These are the only two coins that cost more to make than their value. So while in theory I'm with you on getting rid of the penny, unless you also get rid of the nickel too, you're going to spend a lot more money to get rid of it. I'm sure my position of anti-cash altogether isn't one that you would agree with, so I won't even mention it. I think it's a bit early for anti-cash. I never use cash, but some people do, like especially poorer people. So I'm not going to get on board there. You're right, Philip. But yeah, we're getting there. We're getting closer. I'd like to think there's a middle ground that maybe we can have slightly less cash, and only for the people who are really into it or can't afford phones and all the rest of it. Let's not worry about the anti-cash thing. Let's just talk about the penny. You are right, Philip. That is true. If you got rid of the penny, you would require more nickels because there would be more rounding. Because that's what happens in Australia, and that's what happens in New Zealand and countries that got rid of their 1 and 2 cent coins. Things get rounded off to the nearest 5 cents, and so you would need more nickels. That's true. Probably not for long though. But before long, it'd just be dimes. But still, I hate the pennies. And then Uncle Phil, another Philip, says, "You're right. Trump can just tell the Treasury Secretary to stop making pennies, but that doesn't end them. He needs Congress to make some laws that cover the way we handle transactions below 5 cents. And he can't do that. So his proposal is half-assed, as usual. You have to consider things like standards on whether to round up or down, things like that. It's also interesting that all the crowd against removal of the penny have nothing but straw man arguments. The biggest one being there are poor people who don't want credit cards, they want cash, you can't take it away, which nobody's suggesting. Well, almost nobody at the moment anyway. Uncle Phil, let me introduce you to Philip, who wants to get rid of all cash. But anyway, but this is also a good point. While he can get rid of pennies, to actually make society run without pennies does require laws. I would have thought, surely these are laws that we can pass. Surely Congress can do that when it's not renaming Greenland to be red, white and blue land. Can they just spend 5 minutes saying round up or round down, whatever the closest one is? It's not that hard. Anyway, do you have any thoughts about the penny, Elle, before we move on?
No, I hate cash. It's annoying. I understand, yeah, all of the arguments about why getting rid of cash is bad, but it's just annoying.
Yeah, you're with Philip. Okay, and probably all the Philips. Maybe all the Philips in the world hate cash. For those watching, they'll be pleased to know that the ABC has the old energy saver lighting going, so every half an hour I'm going to have to get up and run up and down the corridor. First topic, I'd like to talk about corruption. We sort of started in this vein last PEP, but I've got a lot more here that I'd like to for us to move into, especially relevant this week. It's open season. It's open season in the Trump administration and corruption. It's for a few reasons. Even now, they're still purging US attorneys. They've been purging US attorneys for the last 3 weeks, just one after another. And look, that you certainly get some sackings with US attorneys between administrations. That's not new. Every now and then, you get a whole bunch of them sacked. I believe George W. Bush did that at one point in time. I don't know of anyone else, but that happens every now and then. That's not unheard of. Just in the last week, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California, Western District of Washington, Maryland, Western District of North Carolina, all sacked. The Director of the Office of Government Ethics was also sacked. That's the chief official making sure government employees comply with ethics requirements. Oh, the U.S. Attorneys, by the way, I should explain who they are. They're the people they're the prosecutors, essentially, for the federal government in each area. But that's just going on in the background, just constantly sacking. That in itself is not a big issue, but it just adds to the circumstance. Another thing that's going on is just gradual chipping away at norms. I hate that word norms. It makes me think of Norm from the Life Be In It campaign from when I was a kid, and Norm Macdonald, who I love, but I love Norm Macdonald, but I don't find norms very funny or very entertaining. I don't like them being associated with Norm Macdonald. White House interference is now okay in the Department of Justice. Just thought you should know, this didn't get much coverage. This is look, it's not new for the White House and the Justice Department to communicate about policy and national security matters. Okay, that happens in every administration, but this is the new part. Last week, as soon as Pam Bondi got the Department of Justice, got the Attorney General role, one of her counsel, David Warrington, put out a memo that says that President Trump, Vice President Vance, and their counsels may ask the Department of Justice about criminal and civil investigations. That's new. That's never been in a memo before that I know of. In 2017, the corresponding memo said that they could initiate conversations. but it didn't say that they could initiate conversations about a specific case or investigation, whether criminal or civil. And that's what the new memo says. So now it is officially within the proper protocol of this White House for Trump and Vance to chat to DOJ about investigations and cases. And that is one big step towards a less independent Department of Justice. And by the way, Trump is bad enough, but Vance, how does the vice president get to push around the Department of Justice? That is very strange. But anyway, that is eroding an important guardrail. But then there's another one, which combined with that makes it even worse. Essentially, the conscience of the Department of Justice has been outlawed. Once again, not much coverage. In the past, Department of Justice attorneys could decline to sign a brief on conscience grounds. If you've read a lot of news, you probably would have seen this happen a few times, where an attorney would just say, "No, I'm not going there. I disagree with this particular legal logic, so I'm not going to sign it. I'm not going to be on board," and then they'll get someone else to do it. That has happened a lot in the past. Well, Pam Bondi has now stopped that. That is not going to be happening anymore. Quote from her memo: "When Department of Justice attorneys, for example, refuse to advance good faith arguments by declining to appear in court or sign briefs, it undermines the constitutional order and deprives the president of the benefit of his lawyers. It is therefore the policy of the Department of Justice that any attorney who, because of their personal political views or judgments, declines to sign a brief or appear in court, refuses to advance good faith arguments on behalf of the administration, or otherwise delays or impedes the department's mission, will be subject to discipline and potential termination consistent with applicable law." It's ironic that the people who are obsessed with religious conscience laws to allow exceptions to abortion, I'm constantly hearing from these kinds of people about doctors not having to practice abortions or nuns not having to have health insurance where their employees can get the pill because of their conscience. Those people won't allow lawyers to exercise their conscience. Seems ironic or, in fact, completely hypocritical, whichever way you run it. Sadly, though, this is a natural consequence of the immunity ruling last year. Recall Jack Smith argued to the court that it was improper for Trump to tell the Department of Justice to lie about his election stealing theories. And Chief Justice Roberts responded with, this was what he wrote in the judgment: "The indictment's allegations that the requested investigations were shams or proposed for an improper purpose do not divest the president of exclusive authority over the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the Justice Department and its officials, and the president cannot be prosecuted for conduct within his exclusive constitutional authority. Trump is therefore absolutely immune from prosecution for the alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department officials." In other words, Trump owns the DOJ and can do what he likes with it. Great. Well, now it's official. So put those two changes together, what I just told you, and you have a DOJ that is no longer independent from the president and whose job is no longer to represent what they think is in the best interest of America, despite that being their oath, but to represent Trump instead, which is not their oath. Essentially, their job is now to be a hack, to not have an opinion and to be a hack, which I think is, I don't know if this is permanent. I don't know if it's going to stay that way, but this is supremely depressing to me, and especially depressing the fact that most people haven't even blinked about this. It's got no coverage at all. No one is even aware that one of the critical norms that their democracy has been built on just disappeared.
I mean, yeah, well, this is sort of follows on a little bit, I guess, of what I was talking about with Curtis Yarvin, right? There's all of, it's so much easier and sexier to report on the cultural stuff that's going on, the stuff that people understand more in their daily life, into whatever Elon Musk is doing, than it is to report on this structural stuff. And like, to be fair as well, uh, any newspaper editor will tell you when they put this stuff online, like they can see who's actually, how many clicks it's getting, and how many people read through it. And so it's just, this stuff just isn't grabbing the headlines because, whatever, line item Elon Musk decides to, control F on a spreadsheet that day and then just tweet about, is getting reported on. And yeah, I mean, look, I just think it's really sad. And it is certainly a failing of my great profession that we haven't had, there just aren't enough people who are able to contextualize this stuff and put it in interesting ways, I think, like you, to see it and sort of show how important it is. But yeah, unfortunately, it's all of the interesting stuff, the hyper online stuff that's getting picked up, and the longer term stuff that really is going to do the damage, particularly this kind of structural stuff, just going straight through to the keeper, as you said, just isn't really being reported on, contextualized. And yeah, it's like everything at the moment. It's like, yeah, that's sad, that's depressing, that's a problem. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Just to be clear, I thought you made a great point there, and I'm not blaming the newspapers themselves because, yeah, they're in a market. They're in a dog-eat-dog market, and I understand that. And, it's not like they invented this situation. I mean, when did T.S. Eliot write The Hollow Man? This is how the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. This has been going for a long time. This tendency for us to not notice the important stuff that just fades away underneath our fingertips while we're looking up. Next thing, there's a bit of a different attitude to corruption in this administration, which is worth noting. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, RIP. Trump just directed the Justice Department to cease enforcing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That would basically this will now allow American businesses to bribe foreign officials or businesses, because the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was what stopped them. This has been a long-term aim of Trump's. He's wanted to do this for a while. And for those who go, it's because he's so corrupt himself, let's just hear him out. What he says is that this law hurts American businesses. Quote, US companies are harmed by Foreign Corrupt Practices Act over-enforcement because they're prohibited from engaging in practices common amongst international competitors, creating an uneven playing field. Obviously, he didn't write that. That was written by some lawyer. But this is what he said when he was actually signing it, the executive order. He said, "It sounds good, but it hurts the country. Many, many deals are unable to be made because nobody wants to do business because they don't want to feel like every time they pick up the phone, they're going to jail." That's his point of view. Now, the order at this stage is just a 6-month renewable pause while they reevaluate how to improve the law. The way Trump's talking about it sounds to me like it's more than a pause. I think it's gone. Also, needless to say, this would directly affect Trump's company, and in particular, Jared Kushner's company, which, let's not forget old Jared. This doesn't make the law go for good. This is an executive order that he signed. The law is still on the books. It's just not being enforced, which means the next administration might just bring it right back. But for now, it's not being enforced. And one more from from executive orders. They're making things a bit different. The Department of Justice has closed their kleptocracy initiative and its associated task force. That was created by Merrick Garland in 2022 to target Russian oligarchs who are violating US economic sanctions after the Ukraine invasion. It's claimed billions of dollars of fraudulent funds and mega yachts and all the rest of it, property. One of the key objectives behind this is to supposedly get their hands on the, when I say objectives, I mean of getting rid of it. Supposedly the reason they want to get rid of it is because they want to get their hands on the money, on the forfeiture fund that's just sitting there untapped at the moment. And they want to get it under DOJ control when they close down the entire task force, and they just got this spare money just sloshing around. That money was historically used to return stolen assets to victim countries, But now, if they close down task force, they can just take the money themselves and run. And Pam Bondi says it'll be used for other law enforcement purposes. Cynics out there think it's to fund the Gitmo initiative for illegal immigrants. But because that's off the books at the moment, so it has no funding source. I don't know. But either way, the klepto initiative is over. So do you have any thoughts about those two particular changes, Elle?
I mean, I guess my main thing is just thinking from a business perspective, because I've, in past lives, I have worked in businesses that did have to consider some of these like foreign corruption rules and things like that. And, what's the one thing people always say about business? That they want consistency, when it comes to regulation. They just want to have a set of rules that they operate under. So I think it's going to be really interesting, the kind of incentives that this creates for businesses. When you said, they're keeping the laws on the books. So if Trump and co are out in 4 years and there's a new lot of people in, I mean, is this going to incentivize business to, get even further behind Trump so that they can, do these practices? Or, I don't know if there's any potential for retrospective punishment or anything like that. And I mean, look, I guess the other thing I would say is, secondly, certainly we know, with oil and gas and things like that, that those rules, there's all sorts of ways to get around them. It's just now, the flagrancy is, it's cultural now. It's fine to do it, but certainly foreign corrupt practices have been, existing forever. Particularly, when it comes to resource extraction, oil and gas and things like that. And yeah, plenty of American companies have paid bribes and will continue to do so. It's just, I think we're just in cowboy country right now. It's just, it's just a free for all. But yeah, it's, once again, we can just end everything that we talk about today with, it's grim. It's just, everything is grim. But yeah.
Well, let's talk about the grimmest part of this topic this particular week. The reason why it's so relevant is because on the same day that the klepto initiative was folded up, Trump pardoned Rod Blagojevich, who served 8 years in prison for corruption. I won't waste your time, Peppers, talking in much detail about that. You can look it up. But trust me, the man was very corrupt. He literally tried to sell a Senate seat. Steve Bannon plea dealed his way to stay out of prison for when he was absolutely going to go to jail. I mean, he was in jail until Trump pardoned him from the federal case, but this was the state version of the same case, and he still was going to go to jail, but he plea dealed his way out. But these are all warm-ups for something else that happened on exactly the same day. It was a bad day for corruption, and this was the day that Eric Adams walked free. Let's talk about this. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You go ahead. You're the Adams expert.
Okay. Let's recall what this was about for those who don't have nightmares about Eric Adams and his double ties and these very thick ties. Eric Adams was accused of taking over $100,000 worth of bribes from Turkey for various favours as New York mayor. He was found to have received free hotel rooms, free meals at fancy restaurants, free and heavily discounted flights, flight upgrades, etc. He never declared them, of course. Sometimes he paid nominal amounts to cover them up. He also received $69,000 in small dollar donations that he could then use New York's matching public finance law to match that $69,000 with $64,000 more dollars from the public financing scheme as well. So that was $133,000 in donations from ill-gotten means. He was charged with 1 count of conspiracy, 1 count of wire fraud, 2 counts of solicitation of foreign contribution, and 1 count of bribery. Now, in exchange for those perks, Adams pressured the New York City Fire Department to approve the opening of a new Turkish consular building without a fire inspection, even though everyone is sure they would have failed a fire inspection. So, and because Turkey just wanted to get that building open quick, no time to get it fire ready. If it had caught fire, then hundreds, if not thousands of people would have died because it was a death trap. But Adams waved it through because he was on the take, allegedly. The highlight of the indictment was, I'll just read you from the indictment. For those who don't remember, this was definitely the best bit. On November the 6th, 2023, FBI agents executed a search warrant for the electronic devices used by Eric Adams, the defendant. Although Adams was carrying several electronic devices, including 2 cell phones, he was not carrying his personal cell phone, which is the device he used to communicate about the conduct described in this indictment. When Adams produced his personal cell phone the next day in response to a subpoena, it was locked, such that the device required a password to open. Adams claimed that after he learned about the investigation into his conduct, he changed the password on November 5, 2024, and increased the complexity of his password from 4 digits to 6 digits. Adams had done this, he claimed, to prevent members of his staff from inadvertently or intentionally deleting the contents of his phone because, according to Adams, he wished to preserve the contents of his phone due to the investigation. But Adams further claimed he had forgotten the password he had just set and thus was unable to provide the FBI with a password that would unlock the phone. So that's the tenor of the clown car nature of Adams's defences. He clearly was guilty, allegedly. He was clearly going down. I did flag that the Supreme Court makes it almost impossible these days to actually convict people of corruption. And there was the potential for, at the Supreme Court level, for him to get away with it. But at least for a long time, he was going to be in court. I'll tell you that much. Adams, for what it's worth, always maintained his innocence. But either way, he was in trouble. And the proof that he was in trouble was the incredible interest that he suddenly seemed to take in Donald Trump, someone who is only too happy to pardon corrupt people. Eric Adams has been dagging around Donald Trump for months now in the hope of getting off his corruption charges. He showed up to Mar-a-Lago for lunch just before Trump's inauguration. He's talking constantly about illegal immigration and how he really wants to crack down on it in New York. He finally got his payoff when the DOJ sent out a memo on Corruption Day, which I described to you before. This was written by the acting Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bowe, but it explicitly said it was authorised by Attorney General Pam Bondi. So this is her doing. She might have had a conversation with someone else as well, I suspect. The DOJ has ordered for there to be a review of Adams' charges, the memo said, by the confirmed US Attorney in the Southern District of New York following the November 2025 mayoral election. But until then, quote, there shall be no further targeting of Mayor Adams or additional investigative steps prior to that review, and you are further directed to take all steps within your power to cause Mayor Adams' security clearances to be restored. Now, was that because the charges didn't stack up? No, it's not. The DOJ said that it has not assessed, quote, the strength of the evidence or the legal theories on which the case is based. The memo states that the order, quote, in no way calls into question the integrity and efforts of the line prosecutors responsible for the case or your efforts in leading those prosecutors in connection with a matter you inherited. Okay, so why dismiss those charges then if there's nothing necessarily wrong with them? Well, 3 reasons. 1, quote, the timing of the charges and more recent public actions by the former US attorney responsible for initiating the case have threatened the integrity of the proceedings, including by increasing prejudicial pretrial publicity that risks impacting potential witnesses and the jury pool. It cannot be ignored that Mayor Adams criticised the prior administration's immigration policies before the charges were filed, and the former US Attorney's public actions create appearances of impropriety that implicate the concerns raised in the Attorney General's February 5, 2025 memorandum regarding restoring the integrity and credibility of the Department of Justice, as well as in Executive Order 1414-7 entitled Ending the Weaponization of Federal Government. It cannot be ignored that Mayor Adams criticised the prior administration's immigration policies before the charges were filed, they say? So you're accusing the Attorney Generals of being corrupt based on what? And by the way, US Attorney Williams, who has been accused of being politically biased here, He was a Democrat, but he also oversaw the indictment of former New York Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin, also a Democrat. He also oversaw the indictment of Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, he also helped secure the indictment and conviction of Sheldon Silver, the Democratic Speaker of the New York State Assembly. Also, the Adams investigation began before this guy was even around. It started long ago, and Williams was quite recent. And Adams only criticised Biden's immigration policies a few weeks before he was indicted. The charges, he'd been investigated for years before that, and I suspect he knew he'd been investigated. So he decided to start talking about immigration after he knew he was being investigated. That's number one. Number two, Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bowe found the charges, quote, improperly interfered with Mayor Adams's campaign in the 2025 mayoral election. Oh, so you can just do whatever you like now, as long as you're running for some kind of office, not just the president, any office at all. We can't interfere with that office. Like, we need to wait till after all elections are over before you can be charged with committing crimes. The charges were filed in September 2024, 9 months before the Democratic primary, 13 months before the general election. The whole trial could have been over before the primary. There's no reason why the election is relevant to this at all. Remember, federal prosecutors are only supposed to leave 60 days before an election clear, not 13 months. Just ridiculous. Number three, the pending prosecution has unduly restricted Mayor Adams' ability to devote full attention and resources to the illegal immigration and violent crime that escalated under the policies of the prior administration. We are particularly concerned about the impact of the prosecution on Mayor Adams' ability to support critical ongoing federal efforts to protect the American people from the disastrous effects of unlawful mass migration and resettlement. Wow. Okay, that is amazing. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously against Bill Clinton that even a sitting president can't be immune from civil litigation on the grounds it'll distract him from his duties. But now the mayor can't be messed with. Note, by the way, even Adams says, I'm focused on protecting the people of the city and the investigations to take care of themselves. So it seems that he disagrees they're a distraction as well. But if there is such a miscarriage of justice here, why didn't they pardon him? That's the important question for me. If you think that it was political and these charges are terrible and it's a miscarriage of justice, well, just pardon him. Why didn't they pardon him? Instead, they left the charges, just left them hanging over his head until after the election, when they might do anything. They might let him go. They might charge him. They reserve the right to decide then. In the meantime, they want him to focus on immigration. How is this not blackmail? This is clearly blackmail. This is such corruption from the federal government. It's really bad. Like, this is bad. Mind you, there is a footnote. There's a footnote that says in the memo, as Mr. Bowe clearly stated to Defence Counsel during our meeting on January 31st, 2025, the government is not offering to exchange dismissal of a criminal case for Adams' assistance on immigration enforcement. Sure. No, I can't believe I suspected you. Bowe, hold that thought, because we're about to hear a lot more about what exactly was going on behind the scenes with this investigation. Before we go on to what happened next, do you have any thoughts about this memo, Elle, that you'd like to share at this moment?
I mean, no, my thing was just going to be saying, yeah, that it's such clear blackmail to ensure that the immigration, that he's on side with immigration. And yeah, it's just, you got to remember that Trump, grew up at the feet of Roy Cohn and mafia lawyers, and it's pretty blatant. 70s New York property developer tactics. And I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. This is, this is who he is. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this, especially given that so far these kind of tactics have been working.
They have been. Okay, well, I'll tell you what happened next. First, the acting US attorney for the Southern District of New York resigned rather than execute that dismissal. Because we need to be clear here, Bowe, as the Deputy Attorney General, can't dismiss anything. He's in charge of the prosecutors, but he is not a prosecutor himself. So he can't dismiss the charges. He needs someone whose job it is to prosecute, to dismiss, to file a dismissal to the court, and then for the court to accept that filing. That's what needs to happen. And the first person who would do this is the acting US attorney for the Southern District of New York, and she resigned. Danielle Sassoon. She's no lefty. She's from the Federalist Society. She's also clerked for Justice Scalia. And she was picked for this role, acting US attorney for the Southern District of New York, by Trump 3 weeks ago. That's why she's acting. They got rid of the Democrat who was there, who they're now trashing, and they replaced the Democrat with this Republican who just said no. She's a super conservative person. She also just prosecuted Sam Bankman-Fried, so she has credibility, and she ain't taking it. She wrote a cracking resignation letter in which she made some excellent points. Not only did she think it was a just prosecution, but she was about to drop another indictment on Adams from a new grand jury, she said. We have proposed a superseding indictment that would add an obstruction conspiracy count based on evidence that Adams destroyed and instructed others to destroy evidence and provide false information to the FBI, and that would add further factual allegations regarding his participation in a fraudulent straw donor scheme. As far as this being a politicised prosecution by US Attorney Williams, remember that? She writes, "If anything, I've learnt that Mr. Williams' role in the investigation and oversight of this case was even more minimal than I'd assumed. The investigation began before Mr. Williams took office. He did not manage the day-to-day investigation, and the charges in this case were recommended or approved by 4 experienced career prosecutors, the chiefs of the SDNY Public Corruption Unit, and career prosecutors at the Public Integrity Section of the Justice Department. Mr. Williams' decision to ratify their recommendations does not taint the charging decision. And notably, Adams has not brought a vindictive or selective prosecution motion, nor would one be successful." That's a huge point. These guys are saying that it's all political, but Adams never made a filing alleging that it was political. The defendant himself didn't raise this, so it's obviously bullshit. Also, the investigation began when Adams was a huge sanctuary city advocate. He changed his mind to be all this immigration hawk afterwards. Like I said before, after he knew that he was being investigated. As for fears of weaponization, this is what she wrote. "Dismissing the case will amplify rather than abate concerns about weaponization of the department. Despite Mr. Bowe's observation that the directive to dismiss the case has been reached without assessing the strength of the evidence against Adams, Adams has already seized on the memo to publicly assert that he is innocent and that the accusations against him were unsupported by the evidence and based only on fanfare and sensational claims." And here's the most damning paragraph of all. This is the one I was foreshadowing before. "I attended a meeting on January 31st, 2025, says Sassoon, with Mr. Bowe and Adams's counsel and members of my office. Adams's attorneys repeatedly urged what amounted to a quid pro quo, indicating that Adams would be in a position to assist with the department's enforcement priorities only if the indictment were dismissed. Mr. Bowe admonished Adams, his attorney? No. A member of my team who took notes during that meeting and directed the collection of those notes at the meeting's conclusion." That is very revealing. While Adams's team is trying to solicit a bribe and notes are being taken of it, Bowe was keen to take the notes. That's extremely revealing. Bowe responded to Sassoon quite angrily. He says she's going to be investigated now, And he writes that he had accepted her resignation based on your choice to continue pursuing a politically motivated prosecution despite an express instruction to dismiss the case. You lost sight of the oath that you took when you started at the Department of Justice. Really? It was a politically motivated prosecution, was it? He's talking about there a case that in his original memo 3 days earlier he had written, and allow me to read it to you again, the Justice Department has reached its conclusion to dismiss the Adams case without assessing the strength of the evidence or the legal theories on which the case is based, which are issues on which we defer to the US Attorney's Office at this time. Moreover, as I said during our recent meetings, this directive in no way calls into question the integrity and efforts of the line prosecutors responsible for the case or your efforts in leading those prosecutors in connection with the matter you inherited. Interestingly, it's been a big 3 days for Bowie there. He just did a big 180 on how weaponized and corrupt this investigation was. Bowie's next move was to take the case to the public integrity section of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. They handle federal public corruption cases, tried to get them to dismiss it. But then their acting head, John Keller, also resigned in protest. So Adams' case was then sent to the Department of Justice's criminal division. Their acting head, Kevin Driscoll, also refused to drop the charges. He's also a Republican. So he resigned as well. Then 3 other deputies in the public integrity section, Rob Herberly, Jen Clark, and Marco Palmieri, they also quit their jobs. Then the lead prosecutor on Adams' case, Assistant US Attorney Hagen Scotton, he also resigned in the most entertaining way possible. His letter concluded with the phrase, I expect you'll eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me. And by the way, this guy was even harder to vilify than Sassoon. He was also a conservative from the Federalist Society. He was a Roberts and Kavanaugh clerk, and he also won 2 Bronze Stars and was on 3 combat tours of Iraq in the Special Forces as well. But note, all of these people are in acting roles. So they're all about to be replaced by other people. This makes their resignations, in my view, actually more impressive because it means they haven't reached the top of their career arc yet. They presumably would have gone back down to where they came from and had lengthy careers in Department of Justice ahead of them and then eventually been promoted and they would have had a nice pension. But they've chosen to resign instead. They're resigning when their careers are still ahead of them. So that is courageous. Good on them. Finally, Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bowe gathered the entire public integrity section of the Justice Department in one room, that's 30 lawyers, and he threatened to fire anyone and everyone who was unwilling to dismiss the case against Adams. He gave them 1 hour to find someone who would do it. And then someone finally stepped up to try to stop the sackings. There was an old guy who's about to retire who said, I don't want you all to have your careers ruined by this, so I'll do it, and then I'll let them have their win, and I'll be resigning soon after that anyway. So that's what he did. So they've finally got the case dismissed, but seven good people had to resign in the meantime. And what are your thoughts, Elle?
I mean, look, there isn't really much to say. It's all fairly self-evident. I guess just in thinking of a historical parallel, just to put this into context, that I was thinking about when I was reading the New York Times had a good write-up about this yesterday. So when Nixon was really under the gun for Watergate, there was an event called the Saturday Night Massacre, where he was trying to get people in his Department of Justice to sack the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, who had subpoenaed Nixon for the White House tapes, that eventually did him in. That was just, sort of considered, fairly beyond the pale at the time and just presidential interference and being above the law. Two people in the Attorney General's department resigned before they were able to find a third person who was agreeing to do it. That's sort of often cited as really just the most egregious interference with the law from a president. And, we got up to 7 people who resigned here before someone decided to, fall on the sword to stop people losing their careers. So I guess if we just want to think about it historically, just to show how, what unprecedented territory we're in now. And trying to unscramble this egg. I mean, this is very clearly going to do extreme and lasting damage to institutions, to the rule of law, to how we conceive the presidency, to people wanting to work in federal government. I mean, these are very, bright people at the top of their game. It's just, this is part of what we were talking about earlier with Yarvin and Musk's grand project of just completely gutting the federal government. It is just saying, just go work in your white shoe law firm. It's easier. You're not going to have to deal with all this stuff. You probably get paid more anyway. And so the kinds of damage that events like this are doing, it's just so hard to. I mean, in some senses, it's very easy to quantify and for us to understand it. But just the cultural shifts that this kind of stuff is going to bring about and just make it easier not to have to go through all of this is really just so. It's just so hard to really comprehend, but it's going to be monumental.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They'll definitely earn more in their white shoe law firm. They're going to be fine. These guys are going to be heroes, and they'll be fine. But America will not be. Oh well, America might be fine, but it's not going to be as well off as it would with them in public service. Sadly, I think you're absolutely right, Elle, that they will definitely make more money in their white shoe law firm. They're going to be fine, but they're leaving a hole behind them. I mean, and that's what's sad, that these people being so principled, it means they're dealt out of the process and replaced by people who are probably going to have far lower principles, whoever Trump appoints into the positions they were holding. Also note, by the way, the judge has to approve of the motion to dismiss. This isn't over yet. It's probably over. But news articles aren't really pointing that out. If the judge puts, say, Bowe on the stand and goes, "What the hell was all this bullshit?" and Bowe doesn't convince the judge that it's in the public interest to dismiss this case, it doesn't get dismissed. So just be aware of that. Even before the case was formally dismissed, though, formally attempted to be dismissed by this person who put up their hand from the Public Integrity Unit, Adams announced that he would issue an executive order to allow ICE into the Rikers Island jail complex to assist in criminal investigations, in particular those focused on violent criminals and gangs. Now note, ICE, I'm talking about Immigration and Customs Enforcement here, ICE are banned from Rikers by New York's Sanctuary City law. They'll pass in 2014. But Adams found a loophole. He's allowed to issue an executive order to allow access for federal immigration authorities, quote, for purposes unrelated to the enforcement of civil immigration laws. So if he says, oh, this isn't about immigration, this is about gangs, cracking down on criminal gangs, that's what this is. So I'm just getting ICE in to deal with these criminal gangs. That bullshit pretext, it's just so obviously not good faith. He can get away with it. So that's what he's doing. And then the day after that announcement, he turned up on Fox News the next day, sitting there with Tom Homan, like Homan was his puppet master with his hand up his ass. It was pathetic. It's Anyway, Eric Adams knows which side of the bread is buttered. That's for sure. As far as Trump's reaction goes, this is it here.
The lead prosecutor in Eric Adams' case resigned today, saying anyone who didn't press forward would be a coward. What's your reaction to that and to the overall implication that politics were at play here?
Well, I don't know about it. I mean, obviously I'm not involved in that, but I would say this, that if they had a problem, and these are mostly people from the previous administration, you understand, so they weren't going to be there anyway. They were going to all be gone or dismissed. If not, they know on Tuesday they're all being, the whole country is being, because what you do is you come in and you put new people in. So when you say resign, they're going to be gone anyway. But I know nothing about the individual case. I know that they didn't feel it was much of a case. They also felt that it was unfair with the election. Look, I would know that better than anybody because I was weaponized more than any human being in the history probably of the world. And I won the election in a landslide, winning all 7 swing states, winning the popular vote and everything else because the people got it. It was weaponized. And I was weaponized literally weeks before the election. But I think there's also something to be said. I read that. There's something to be said for what they were doing. It looked to me to be very political. But why didn't they bring this up like 4 or 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, or whenever it happened? They just sat around and didn't complain. Then all of a sudden they complain, and they know they're all being dismissed anyway. So, that's the way it is. That's called politics, I guess.
Yeah, good point, Trump. Why didn't these attorneys raise those objections 6 weeks ago that they were going to be asked to dismiss Eric Adams's case in 6 weeks' time? That's a great question. It must be because they're so political. You really thought this one through. Good thoughts, good thoughts. For those who think I'm being a little bit cynical there and saying, well, you can't prove Trump was involved. Maybe Trump wasn't involved. Maybe Trump had nothing to do with these sackings. Maybe Pam Bondi just genuinely is shocked by the politicization of the Eric Adams case. Maybe. Let me remind you what I just told you before about how now Trump can talk to the Department of Justice about any case he likes, like the Eric Adams case. So, yeah, you draw your own conclusion based on that. The interesting thing for me, though, is that it took Trump less than a week after he gave himself the power to interfere in cases for him to interfere in one of the most egregious ways we have seen recently. To not just get a case dismissed, but to turn it into blackmail. Blatantly. That's on week 3 of his administration. He's got 4 more years to push this new toy as far as he can go in some really unwelcome directions. I think before the election, I foreshadowed that this was the area I was most concerned about, Trump and the Department of Justice, Trump and the Army. And it's certainly panning out that way. One last question. Should Kathy Hochul dismiss Adams herself? You might go, who's Kathy Hochul? She's the governor of New York. She has the power to dismiss Eric Adams. She met up with, she's a Democrat as well. She met up with New York power brokers to decide how she should proceed on the weekend. If she decides to sack Adams before the March 26th, there's going to be a special election to replace him. Cool. If there's not, if she didn't do it by March 26th, then there will just be a fill-in until the election later this year. But Kathy Hochul and her crew have 2 concerns. Number 1, who's going to win that special election? I think they have reason to believe that Andrew Cuomo would win that special election. Everyone in New York hates Andrew Cuomo. They do not want Andrew Cuomo coming back. Number 2, if they had a caretaker mayor, either till the special election or till November, it would be next down the line, which is, I think it's Jamani Williams. I think that's how you pronounce it. I might be wrong there. They hate him as well because they think he's too left-wing. So they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. They don't want either of the likely people to replace Eric Adams, so he might get away with it. I don't know. I'd go for the lefty myself, even though I probably don't agree with anything the lefty has to say either. But at least he isn't corrupt. It's my thoughts. Do you have anything to add to this before we get to the next topic?
No, I mean, just other than if she's not going to pull the trigger, it just really goes to show just how institutionally the Democratic Party is just not able to deal with this moment, institutionally, culturally. It doesn't matter that your political enemy might have a chance of getting elected. surely it should be that there's, just the most flagrant corruption happening in front of our eyes. And as we, discussed before, that there's this, really profound institutional damage going on. And, surely the thing is you just have to stop that. And the fact that they won't, that there isn't pressure coming, where is the sort of national democratic leadership coming from? To say, where's the George Clooney letter on this, in the thing, where's Pelosi? There needs to be someone to step up and just say, we have to stop this, because that is just such the really frustrating thing, that we knew that this sort of stuff was going to happen. We can see it happening. It is so egregious. It is so transparent, and no one wants to do anything about it. And, when we think back to, was it only 3 months ago before the election, and, people in the Democrats were saying, can we say the F word? Is he going to bring in fascism? And, I'm not going to get into that whole debate about whether this is fascism, but there clearly is a, very authoritarian streak that is happening, very authoritarian policies and breaches of norms and the rule of law that is going on right now. And the fact that no one on the Democratic Party really seems interested in stepping in and saying we have to do something is just so damning of the party. And I just would hope that someone does the right thing.
Let's see. We shouldn't condemn them before they have had a chance to make a move, but I think you make an excellent point.
The fact that they're even, I think, look, the fact that they're even hesitating is kind of the source of my condemnation, because it just, it shouldn't even be a thought process.
Yeah.
But clearly they don't want to pull the trigger. Yeah. So here we are.
You're right. It should have happened the same afternoon. Okay, let's go to the other correspondence that I put off. This is from Nick, and this was the ultimate in Elle specific correspondences, because he didn't even send to us, he sent to you. For your upcoming appearance on PEP, I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on J.D. Vance's conversion to Catholicism, given he seems uninterested in doctrine and Catholicism is historically a second-rate path to political advancement in the US.
Okay. This is very much my wheelhouse, for better and for worse. So, I mean, I guess just as a personal rule, I try not to judge the sincerity of someone's conversion. So we'll just kind of talk about the stuff around it. Although I will actually note, so Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was, very famous new atheist, she recently converted to Christianity. But unlike Ali, J.D. Vance actually mentioned Jesus in his conversion essay. Ayaan Hirsi Ali did not mention Jesus once in her very long essay on why she converted to Christianity. So I'm just noting that for the purpose of the tape. So Vance basically comes out of the Appalachian Pentecostal movement, which is, stuff that I've written a lot about. I think he was, a lot of people in that kind of area just kind of grow up with it as a default. I don't think he was ever especially religious, although he did say as a teenager he had some, questions, a crisis of faith and some questions with God. Later in life, he came to God and particularly Catholicism through Peter Thiel. So he's the Silicon Valley billionaire. Sorry, my cat's just entered.
I'm absolutely not editing that out. For those who are listening, like Lockie, don't edit the cat out.
This is Irma. She's such a, sorry, I just have to let her out.
Of course, you let her out. For those who are listening, you might want to check out the time signature, then head over to YouTube and have a good look at Elle's cat.
She's a tuxedo former street cat who very much enjoys her new life, and all the trappings that come with it, including being able to boss around people as she pleases. So
she's like a mini version of that runaway dog you described before, the Houdini dog.
Yeah, except she likes the indoor life. She just likes to come and go as she pleases. So yeah, if I didn't open the door and let her out, she would have made she would have made this unlistenable. So
That's my
you
job.
you got you got to obey the cat.
Okay.
Okay, so we're so yeah, he JD Vance became interested in Catholicism through Peter Thiel, who's the Silicon Valley billionaire who runs Palantir, who was an early investor in Facebook. And Peter Thiel is a devotee of René Girard, who's a very prolific French philosopher and literary critic who taught at Stanford. So he converted to Catholicism in the 1960s after reading Dostoevsky. So we won't go into all that, but that's obvious. You know, he's a very serious guy and a good thinker, and I've read some of his stuff, and I'm somewhat on board with with his philosophy. But he has a lot of ideas that have been taken up by a lot of people on the sort of techno right. So it is quite interesting to understand them, to understand Vance and where a lot of these a lot of the tech billionaires are coming from. So his Girard's main idea is a theory of desire that he says sort of animates all of human interaction, called mimetic desire, which means that we learn what we want to have by imitating others, what others want. So we borrow our desires from other people rather than coming up with them necessarily ourselves. And this leads to a pattern where we don't necessarily want something, we want to be something. So I mean, certainly when I've read Girard myself, I had a few dark nights of the soul. Do I want to write or do I want to be a writer? And these are kind of quite profound questions that I still deal with, and so do many other people. But this theory of mimetic desire leads to this idea of scapegoating, which is the basis of all Christian thought, right? That mimetic desire, if you have something that I learned that I want from you, that's going to lead to violence. And so humans created the scapegoat mechanism. It's basically, some people will say it's what turned us from being animals into being humans, where you sacrifice someone as like a release valve to stop, society just being in a constant wave of violence. And one pretty well-known dude fits the bill of scapegoating, sacrificing one person so that all of society can be, all of humanity can be saved. And that's where his philosophy ties into Christianity. Girard sort of goes into looking at human history, from myths and Greek and Roman gods and things like that, and says, Christianity is the first time where an innocent victim becomes the focal point of the faith. Gods in other traditions are violent and vengeful, and the Gospels is the first time in human history where people have understood Satan's role in the formation of society and taken the side of of the innocent victim as the hero, for want of a better word. So that forms a lot of the basis of J.D. Vance's literal coming to God. Although he also says Saint Augustine's Confessions play a big part in that, and he actually said that Augustine gave him the way to understand Christian faith in a strongly intellectual way. So again, I'm not going to I try not to pass judgment on someone's spiritual sincerity, but certainly Vance writes a lot in his conversion essay that came out in 2020, I believe, in The Lamp magazine. He talks a lot about how his faith is very strongly intellectual, as well as spiritual. And it is part of, I think J.D. Vance really fits in sort of the wider intellectual moment on the right that really has repudiated the era of new atheism that was sort of, that post 9/11, very robust kind of liberal culture. But it still takes on a lot of the same kind of ideas, of civilizational decline, self-sufficiency, liberal cultural decadence, tying back into a lot of the stuff that we were talking about earlier with Yarvin. and just ideas of kind of, natural laws and things like that. I will also, I think it's pretty important to place Vance in the context of US Catholicism, which particularly white US Catholicism is extremely hostile to the current Pope. And that's, where sort of Vance has had his quibbles with the Pope. The Pope Pope Francis is Argentinian. Has called himself a communist and said that Jesus was a communist. And, we've seen people like, there was a very famous Texan Bishop Strickland who was recently defrocked for, sort of open insubordination. There's a lot of US priests and nuns who are very openly in defiance and very powerful critics of Pope Francis papalship. Is that I don't know if that's the actual word.
So.
Yeah. And very, very constant critics about that, this is it's left-wing wokeism in the Vatican, all the usual stuff that you hear all the time. But I think what's another thing that's really important to understand J.D. Vance's conversion, and just what's really happening in right-wing Christianity in the United States in particular, but obviously a lot of the rest of the world also gets its cues from that. And that it really is this sort of political, muscular, masculine Christianity is about adopting that persecution narrative I was speaking about earlier, but turning it around and saying that conservatives are the victims of a ruling liberal elite. So again, this ties in very closely with a lot of the stuff that Curtis Yarvin has been pushing for a long time. And Vance's conversion essay, which I'll send you a link to put in the homework because it's pretty interesting. Yeah. He's fairly open about that. He talks about St. Augustine's criticism of the debauchery of Rome's ruling class. And he, understands, Vance says that he understands a God who, in quotes, is sympathetic with the meek and the poor of the world without treating them primarily as victims. And yeah, just another bit of homework that I think would be really interesting if people are wanting to delve more into J.D. Vance's sort of life and beliefs and philosophies. There's a really cool podcast called Know Your Enemy by and one of the guys, Matt Sitman, is also a Catholic convert who sort of grew up in sort of poor white Appalachia, and he's a very left-wing Catholic and a very smart guy. And he did a really interesting episode about reading Vance's memoir. I know Dr. Dave talked about it a little while ago and had a lot of the same criticisms. But Sitman really talks a lot about how Vance's just personal history, which is, very much so tied into his spiritual and political current thoughts and the way that he acted on them is so often him sort of adopting a father figure and trying to remake himself in their image, which is obviously, a big part of Christianity. But you see why he, got so invested with Peter Thiel and sort of wanted to be the sort of the best possible adopted son. And you're seeing it again with Trump. He's completely remade himself in 8 years to be the most maggeriest MAGA on earth to appeal to, the new father figure in his life, Donald Trump. And I thought that was just very profound and interesting.
That is interesting. So,
yeah,
I mean, that would suggest, well, number one, it suggests that Nick saying that Vance seems uninterested in doctrine, you would disagree with that. It's just not. It's not basic doctrine. It's kind of involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I suppose it just depends on what there's a lot in the Bible, right? And it depends what kind of doctrine you're interested in. If it's the sort of traditions of the Gospels and parables and how to treat people and how to sort of try and be a good person in that. Maybe not so much so, but he's certainly I think unlike some people in the movement who take, I think, a very crude view of Christianity, he certainly has read this stuff, has thought about it, has interpreted it. I think a lot of people would might just come to a very different conclusion about the meaning of all of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I think it's really interesting that these two bits of correspondence came up, because you can see so many threads of Yarvin's neo-reactionary movement coming through this, coming through what is, sort of very conservative Christianity today, and really just that taking on that persecution narrative, I think is a really helpful way to think about it, and just to say that the ruling class is this cultural liberal elite ruling class that have lauded their culture over us, so mass immigration, gay marriage, all those sorts of things. And this is now that they are the persecuted people trying to reassert family values and things like that.
That is really interesting. Now, and I agree. Like, now you've pointed out like that, it does explain so much. It also explains why I just don't understand this guy at all, because I just don't get the persecution narrative at all. I'm the direct opposite of that. So I guess that explains a lot about me as well. While you're running hot though, Elle, I'd like you, now we're not going to be doing much Doge. We'll give Doge a rest. We've had two peps in a row full of Doge.
I'm doged out. I would be so happy to never have to talk about that stupid acronym again.
Yeah. Well, you say that, but then you asked me to bring up one aspect of it. So now you're the hypocrite. We can skip it if you want, but you're the one who said you wanted to talk about the media subs.
Oh, look, it's just a very, very minor thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just obviously from I have some personal interest in what little money is left in our great profession. But yeah, I did notice this week that part of the USA funding cuts that were going on, that they Doge people found out that Politico, the website, is getting USAID funding and something like $8 million in subscriptions from the government, which I think a lot of news websites probably would. And it is kind of troubling, because I think that's, you can see that the big balls or whoever are all there, control Fing on a spreadsheet and just trying to find line items that they can claim as victories, and seeing repeated subscriptions to newspapers and other media outlets is going to be a very easy thing to slash. And I mean, most of these things are running on a pretty oily rag anyway, and just sucking $8 million out overnight, down the line might have some pretty catastrophic consequences for the media, which is already on its knees. Although, as it actually turned out in the end, the USAID money for Politico, it was only actually 24,000.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly how all that, where exactly was coming from. But another interesting thing, just to note, is that the publisher of Politico is a German publishing house called Axel Springer.
Yeah.
And they are the organization that owns, I think it's Bild in Germany, the big tabloid, that let Musk run his op-ed about why everyone should be behind the far-right AfD party towards the end of last year.
There you go.
Yeah. So not sure exactly what's happening there, but, it just goes to show sometimes that cuddling up to these people is not always in your best interest. It doesn't always have you a friend for life.
Yeah. To answer your question, there were 2 subscriptions to E&E, which is an environmental offshoot of Politico, and they're pretty involved subscriptions, so they're $10,000 each for the year, and they had 2 subscriptions, so it was just over $20,000 per year. That was what USAID were paying to Politico for 2 subscriptions, and the $8 million, as you say, was across the entire government. I think over a couple of years. I don't think that was 1 year, but I might be wrong on that. But it was the entire government. And also, I should say that while they would undoubtedly have subscriptions to all the major newspapers, if I'm being fair, they were spending more on Politico than most other papers, because the Politico subscription service is not normal Politico. Politico Pro is like a full-on involved legislative digest of all the court cases out there, all the regulation changes, it's essentially designed for people either in the government or who work with the government to know what's going on. So actually is a good expenditure. It makes sense, but it costs $10,000. So for instance, presumably there are more New York Times subscriptions out there than Politico subscriptions, and the New York Times was making less money from the government than Politico was. I mean, it was still making millions, but it was making less millions than Politico was, because Politico Pro was 10 grand a pop, whereas the New York Times was, whatever it is, I don't know what it is, a few $100, I guess, a pop. But anyway, yes, that's what was going on there. And Bloomberg was charging way more, because their terminal subscription is like $32,000 a year. So anyway, whatever. But on that note, I want to raise, like, I was thinking, if you're going to bring that up, I wanted to ask you, as a reporter, I know you're not a political reporter, but as a reporter, we're seeing before us a classic news/political conundrum about this Gulf of America bullshit with the AP, which I wanted to ask you about. Like you as a journo, what you're doing in this circumstance, because I'll just remind people what we're talking about. Trump obviously has called the Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America recently, which is good for America. It's not good for the rest of the world. It has no effect on the rest of the world. So so if you look at Google Maps, if you look at if you in Australia look at the Gulf of Mexico, it'll say the Gulf of Mexico. It might say, I think it says Gulf of America in brackets after it in italics or something, but the main name is Gulf of Mexico. If you look in America, it says the Gulf of America. Like it just changes based on where you are. And what the AP said in their style guide update was that they would continue using Gulf of Mexico because the Gulf is an international body of water that's been known by that name for 400 years. And, quote, as a global news agency that disseminates news around the world, the AP must ensure that place names and geography are easily recognisable to all audiences. They would, however, honour the change back to Mount McKinley because they said the area lies solely in the United States, and as President Trump has the authority to change federal geographical names within the country. To be honest, I'm not sure what 400 years has got to do with it. The law is the law, but the federal law giving Trump the power to rename Denali to Mount McKinley actually applies explicitly to both domestic and foreign geographic names. So even though in Mexico they will call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico, still when you're reporting in America, the actual name is the Gulf of America. I'm not sure. It's a bit confusing to me about why they wouldn't be treated both the same. But I get that they're reporting for people outside. Either way, I don't care. Like, the AP can make whatever call they make. It's a reasonable call. I don't think it's an unreasonable call. Carolyn Levitt, on the other hand, does not think it's a reasonable call. This is what she has to say.
Which White House official made the decision to bar the AP reporter from the Oval Office and the diplomatic reception room last night?
Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight. It is a privilege to cover this White House. It's a privilege to be the White House press secretary. And nobody has the right to go into the Oval Office and ask the President of the United States questions. That's an invitation that is given. And there are hundreds of outlets on this campus, many of you in this room who don't have the privilege of being part of that pool every single day and getting to ask the President questions. We reserve the right to decide who gets to go into the Oval Office, and you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature is the argument, because the reason that the AP was barred, which they said was because they're not using the phrase Gulf of America, they're using Gulf of Mexico in line with their standards. And so the question here is this setting a precedent that this White House will retaliate against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use? And how does that align with the First Amendment commitment that you were just talking about?
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't want to call it that, but that is what it is. The Secretary of Interior has made that the official designation in the Geographical Identification Name Server. And Apple has recognized that. Google has recognized that. Pretty much every other outlet in this room has recognized that body of water as the Gulf of America. And it's very important to this administration that we get that right, not just for people here at home, but also for the rest of the world.
Now, on one hand, Carolyn Levitt, I think, has been extremely petty there. And I feel like we are all diminished by having this argument. But on the other hand, I do think the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression are right when they say punishing journalists for not adopting state-mandated terminology is an alarming attack on press freedom. That is viewpoint discrimination and it's unconstitutional. President Trump has the authority to change how the US government refers to the Gulf. He cannot punish a news organization for using another term. And so in this case, the punishment is the key. Not disagreement, but punishment. I also think the hypocrisy is notable because the Trump administration are the ones who have put out a free speech executive order about governments pressuring private citizens into making certain opinions unacceptable, which is what they're doing right here. So hugely hypocritical. The courts, by the way, have backed this up. In November 2018, Trump revoked Jim Acosta's press credentials after he felt Acosta was rude at his presser during an argument over Trump using the term invasion to describe illegal immigrants. Trump said, you have to treat the White House with respect. You have to treat the presidency with respect. Judge Tim Kelly of the District Court of the District of Columbia disagreed. He ruled in CNN's favour, saying that while presidents have the right to decide which outlets can cover the White House, it cannot revoke access without sufficient due process. In August 2019, the same thing happened to Playboy correspondent Brian Karem. He got into an argument at the presser. They suspended his credentials. He sued and won on due process grounds. Since the AP were banned from one presser, one White House correspondent, so White House press availability, because they were lying about what the Gulf of America was called. Taylor Budowich, who's part of the press, the White House press team, has tweeted out, the Associated Press continues to ignore the lawful geographic name change of the Gulf of America. This decision is not just divisive, but also exposes the Associated Press's commitment to misinformation. While their right to irresponsible and dishonest reporting is protected by the First Amendment, it does not ensure their privilege of unfettered access to limited spaces like the Oval Office and Air Force One. Going forward, that space will now be opened up to the many thousands of reporters who have been barred from covering these intimate areas of the administration. Associate Press journalists and photographers will retain their credentials to the White House complex. So it's pretty trolly to call it misinformation and irresponsible, as if the AP is doing some grave harm by not indulging Trump's ego. But, Elle, where do you stand on this? Do you think to yourself, well, look, no one has the right to be in the White House in the White House briefing room or the Oval Office, or do you think no, this is actually punishing the press? This is the government punishing the press for their views, which is exactly what the First Amendment was designed to stop. What's your view?
That is correct. Look, I probably should care about this maybe a little more than I do, because you can see as a point of principle, it's not great, and it's the kind of thing that you can see them running with the precedent in future. I mean, at the same time, I mean, how much I don't know if a lot of the White House press gallery has they already make a lot of compromises in terms of securing access and things like that. But look, I think, in an ideal world, people would show solidarity and they would say that we're all striking and not covering this stuff. Doesn't make a difference. I don't know. I just think that there are bigger issues at the moment to probably be worrying about. Although I do understand it as a point of principle. Yeah, I don't know. How about yourself? You're a 1A guy, so I imagine you'd be pretty. This is more. Like I said, I should care more about it, but I feel like this is your wheelhouse. So take it away.
I am a 1A guy, and I'm striking. That's what I'm doing. If I'm in the White House press corps, I'm boycotting them, and they are welcome to fill that briefing room with right-wing bloggers if they want. That's okay. We can still report on what's going on. We don't need to be in the briefing room, but I think that as a matter of principle, we need to draw a very, very bright line against the government trying to tell you what to think and what to say. This is coercion of speech. That's what this is. It is coercion, which is exactly what the Supreme Court were looking for when the shoe was on the other foot and Trump was going crazy about Facebook and social media censorship. And they had that case about COVID, about whether Biden's whether Biden's social media team were pressuring Facebook. The exact word that the Supreme Court were looking for was coercion of speech. Is there coercion going on? They concluded in this case, there was no coercion. In this case, there is 100% coercion. There's just no doubt about it. Like, it is the very definition of coercion. And so I think they need to have their hypocrisy thrust in their face over and over and over again. Doesn't mean you can't report on the important stuff, on the other stuff. Obviously, in the scheme of things, this is not important compared to some other things happening. You can still report on those other things. But the bottom line is, you don't need to be in the Oval Office asking Trump a question to report negatively on something he's doing. You can still do that. But I think that this in itself is valuable to draw a line. So I would. I'm not surprised that other people aren't going with me. But if it's me, I'm striking. I have to say, I think this is just too bright a line. And yes, in this instance, who gives a shit? I'd feel embarrassed while I was striking, but...
You wouldn't carry a placard saying,
Yeah.
Gulf of Mexico forever or something like that.
I'm not sure I'd be doing that. But I would certainly be doing something to draw media attention to the issue so I could then talk about that issue. I'd want to turn up on Bill Maher's show or something and have a go about it. No, people aren't going to cover it unless you make them cover it. And the way you make them cover it is by doing things like that, doing something eye-catching. And so I'd be striking. If it was me, that's what I would be doing. Would you, if you write an article for an international magazine, what are you calling the Gulf?
Oh, I mean, it's probably something you'd have to add parentheses into at the moment, just to I'd probably say, Gulf of Mexico brackets, currently and can content, currently called America in the United States or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, I live on the Gulf of America.
I was about to ask. Yes.
Yeah. So
proud of it? Was that a big day for you when he changed the name?
Yeah. Like I said, I've been very, very happily immersed in book writing and mostly in 1970s America at the moment. So, some days it's just nice to switch off from this stuff because, I mean, that's the thing, right? It's just that the constant, with all the executive orders, it really is to just, kind of beat people down, to overwhelm them, to just make people, have to chase ridiculous things. Like, this is stupid and unnecessary. And as a sensible person, you are, very rightly grabbing onto it as a point of principle and not allowing it to be a precedent. But it is so stupid. And everything is just so stupid at the moment if it wasn't so also serious.
Yeah. And by the way, back when Fox News got banned from the press room, there was a lot of talk of strikes. This is under Obama. There's a lot of talk of strikes then. And people didn't think it was trivial then. So we got to be consistent. I'm going to... Thanks. I'm just going to make one very, very brief aside, which I'm going to totally own that this is not mine. This is David Frum's. Such a great observation. So I just want to give him credit for it. This is from The Atlantic. I'm going to read you a passage directly from him in a sec. Okay, so first of all, he said, bodies of water are typically named by dominant nations, not after themselves, but after the subordinate nations on the other side. And then he made the point that places are often named from the perspective of the explorers who found them. So the Gulf of Mexico was named by 16th century Spanish map makers because when a Spaniard sailed towards Mexico, the Gulf was the sea that the Spaniard crossed. Similarly, the Indian Ocean is the sea that the English crossed. The Java Sea is the sea that the English crossed to go to Java. Even the English Channel is an anglicised version of what the Romans called it. They called it whatever the Britannic Ocean is in Latin for the same reason, because that was what they crossed to go to that country. So, to go back to David Frum, to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America is to reconceptualize the United States not as a sending point, but as a receiving point. No longer a country that stamps itself upon history, but a country upon which history is stamped. Maybe in that very specific sense, the attempted renaming of the Gulf of Mexico is a fitting memorial to the Trump era. Trump's act of imperial boastfulness unwittingly reveals a disquieting self-awareness of imperial decline. As so often, Trump claims to be a winner while acting like a loser. I thought that was a really good observation. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, fair enough. I guess, I mean, this isn't entirely new. You know, if you think the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Gulf is, you know, different people and from, you know, different allies, I suppose, call it after themselves. Yeah, overall, the principle, I just don't know if it's that important. As David Frum seems to think it is, but like I said, it's so stupid.
Yeah.
It's so stupid that we are even talking about this kind of stuff.
I know. Let's stop. I'm going to put the lights back on at the ABC while you think, Elle, about how you're going to begin the next topic about Ukraine.
So, yeah, in terms of Ukraine, obviously it was a pretty big moment last week. Pete Hegseth went to Brussels and said that the US is no longer primarily focused on European security. He also said that restoring Ukraine's territory to pre-war borders isn't realistic. And then JD Vance obviously went over and did a speech at the Munich Security Conference, I think it was, which Ukraine, you know, are refusing to participate in. They were at this conference, but they're refusing to participate in further actual peace talks. But I think that's the speech, which I'm sure you'll probably play some more of. Again, just going back to the theme that we're talking about a lot today. It was really for a US domestic audience, right? It was just teeing off on European decadence, you know, saying the danger for them isn't China or Russia, it's the calls coming from inside the house, you know, very, very clearly talking about, you know, migration and things like that as being the threat to Europe. And that, you know, people really just saying that Ukraine is only going to be on the, you know, it's on the table as doing a deal, and that it's just really solidifying, you know, what is probably going to become known as the Trump doctrine, I suppose, that US is no longer responsible for European security, which is obviously a huge, you know, potentially the biggest shift since in US foreign policy since 1945, and obviously, you know, has all sorts of implications for NATO. I mean, I guess I'd just say two things on this is that maybe I know like people in European security circles have been talking about it for a while, but does seem a little bit naive, I think, if people are caught on the hop by this. You know, we have seen, you know, Obama and Biden talking about pivoting to the Pacific, about China being the new issue for a long time. And so while it's not great that, you know, that Trump is really, you know, not interested in previous alliances and things like that, perhaps there should have been a bit more of, from a European perspective, of really taking this seriously and understanding that the Cold War is very over and that US commitment to the region, you know, has been slipping away for some time. Anyway, so I'll let you speak for the moment because there's a lot to go into here.
There is. Okay. Well, I think first of all we should divvy this up because there's two different topics here. One is Ukraine and the other is Europe. Like, because they are different
that's fair.
things.
Yeah.
But so the first thing I'll do is I'll just take what you were just talking about, and I will first of all play Pete Hegseth talking about the new situation that Europe is facing.
We're also here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese, with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes. As the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front. Together, we can establish a division of labor that maximizes our comparative advantages in Europe and Pacific, respectively. The United States remains committed to the NATO alliance and to the defense partnership with Europe. Full stop. But the United States will no longer tolerate an imbalanced relationship which encourages dependency. Rather, our relationship will prioritize empowering Europe to own responsibility for its own security.
And I would pick up where you just left off there and note that what he just said then sounds a little bit like what Robert Gates said back in 2011, which I'll read you out now. The blunt reality is that there will be dwindling appetite and patience in US Congress and in the American body politic writ large to expend increasingly precious funds on behalf of nations that are apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources or make the necessary changes to be serious and capable partners in their own defence. Nations apparently willing and eager for American taxpayers to assume the growing security burden left by reductions in European defence budgets. Indeed, if current trends in the decline of European defence capabilities are not halted and reversed, future US political leaders may not consider the return on America's investment in NATO worth the cost. I actually think Robert Gates was significantly harsher than Pete Hegseth was, and that was back in 2011. So I agree with you 100% that this has been coming for a long time. But I want to take a step back then and just talk about Ukraine for a second, and then we will focus on that. And that is, first of all, I'll just make the point that if we go back to, this has been a bit of a ride for Ukraine, I think, the last month, because if we go back to just before Trump's inauguration, there was a period of optimism there for Ukraine, I thought. I thought that even though Russian forces control, 20% of Ukraine, they've been advancing over the last year, the fastest rate since the beginning of the war. They've seized more than 1,600 square miles in 2024. Having said that, Russia had suffered, 790,000 casualties at this point in time. That's wounded or killed, just be clear. They were handing out $50,000 bonuses for recruits. They needed people that much. Bearing in mind the average monthly salary in Russia is $750. Inflation's at 9%, the central bank interest rates at 21%. And Trump was starting to turn up the heat with his rhetoric. Like, he was literally tweeting out shit like, I'm going to do to Russia, whose economy is failing, and President Putin a very big favour. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never would have started if I was president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. obviously Russia wouldn't give a stuff about tariffs. They only exported $3 billion to America in 2024. That's like 0.1% of their GDP. But the point is, Trump was taking the tone that this is your fault. It's time for you to settle this war, which he hasn't taken once until that moment, where he's unambiguously pointing at Russia. And then around the same time, he said this.
And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down, which frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. That didn't show a lot of love by them not doing it. I was a little surprised by that. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war.
He's absolutely right there, that oil prices would kill Russia. They are living off their oil exports right now. And if Trump convinced Saudi Arabia to drop oil prices, that would hurt Russia so badly. And they knew it. So he was explicitly threatening them at the beginning of his term. Also, and this is the most important bit, as far as I was concerned, did you see who he made his Ukraine-Russia envoy? It was Keith Kellogg, who is, he's a MAGA guy, but he is unambiguously on Ukraine's side in this war. Unambiguously negative towards Russia. His daughter, Megan Mobbs, she leads a foundation that provides humanitarian aid to Ukraine. That's her job. Okay, so he is totally on Ukraine's side, and he is Trump's Ukraine-Russian envoy. So you go, okay, this is cause for optimism from Ukraine. Maybe Trump is going to switch sides here, because we've always assumed to be on Russia's side. But maybe, and then Trump came out and he called for Ukraine's rare earth metals, which people also thought, oh no, here he goes. He's trying to exploit Ukraine. He said, we're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're hand in hand in money, hand over fist. We're giving them equipment. The European Union's not keeping up with us. We have an ocean in between. They don't. It's more important for them than it is for us. So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things. I want to have security of rare earth. We're putting hundreds of billions of dollars. They have great rare earth, and I want security of the rare earth, and they're willing to do it. Apart from the fact that he's speaking English like it's a second language there, it sounds like he's got a problem. It sounds like Zelensky's got a problem until Zelensky just said, yeah, let's do it. He said, if we're talking about a deal, let's do a deal. We're only for it. The Americans help the most, and therefore the Americans should earn the most. And they should have this priority, and they will. The key here is that the majority of Ukraine's minerals are in the east. A lot of them are already in Russian-controlled territory. So this gives Trump a huge incentive to help Ukraine negotiate land back. And don't think Zelensky didn't know that. So Zelensky would have been feeling pretty good about this situation. Finally, they got Trump to put some skin in the game, and then Trump went on Fox.
I want to have our money secured because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. And, you know, they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have all this money in there. And I say, I want it back. And I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth. And they've essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid. Otherwise, we're stupid.
And it was pretty clear at that moment that Trump was happy to take the money without actually giving Ukraine the security. And at that moment, Zelensky would have a sinking feeling in his stomach, and everything changed immediately from then. First of all, Mark Fogel was released, the dude who was a teacher, got caught with 0.6 of an ounce of medical marijuana, sentenced to 14 years in Russia. That at one point in time, Rubio was trying to pretend that there was no exchange. There was an exchange. I don't know why he tried to lie. We're always going to find out. There was an exchange for a Russian who pled guilty to crypto conspiracies, Alexander Vinnik. He had dodgy crypto exchange. Importantly, that exchange meant they were negotiating behind the scenes. We didn't know they were, but they were. And then Trump announced his phone call. I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we'll begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I'll be doing right now. He goes on. A few important things. Number one, Biden froze Putin out completely after the invasion. Trump was having discussions with him directly, immediately. So that's the first concession. Two, this is a discussion between Putin and Trump without Zelensky. Trump suggesting they are going to keep Zelensky in the loop with what they decide. This is exactly what Putin has been wanting the whole time. Sidelining Zelensky. So Trump just gave him that for nothing. Number two. Then, number three, this answer from a presser made the whole thing even clearer, where Trump was asked whether he saw Ukraine as an equal member of the peace process. This is what he said.
Do you expect Ukraine?
Say it, what?
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace.
We will continue.
I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
Why did you decide to talk?
At that point in time, Zelensky's stomach, which was sinking, would have been below his feet, I imagine. And then the moment when Zelensky knew he was screwed was when Trump announced his negotiation team. It was Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is not a special envoy of anything in particular, just generally. Who's missing? The Russia-Ukraine envoy is missing. Keith Kellogg, the guy who is pro-Ukraine. That, when he replaced Keith Kellogg with Steve Witkoff, Ukraine knew they were fucked. And that's the same day Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed Director of National Intelligence, the person who Russian media explicitly praise her on air. The same time, the freeze on foreign assistance was biting because Ukraine gets so much of their money from US aid and their foreign assistance. And that is the context when the next day Pete Hegseth made his speech. So I just wanted to go back to set all that up because I think that puts the whole thing in context. And so I'll play for everyone at home the bit where he talked about giving up on Ukraine's original boundaries, giving up on NATO having influence, and giving up on any US involvement whatsoever in the future of Ukraine. I'll play that now.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
He gave up on all that before they even started negotiating. I don't know what else Russia could have asked for. Also, no US guarantees about if Russia invades, what happens then. So why wouldn't Russia invade again in 10 years' time or in 5 years' time. America's giving no guarantees. They're living up to Europe. And also, Hegseth thinks America should be negotiating a peace deal without Europe that they expect Europe to enforce with their troops. Huh? Like, that is really cheeky stuff. The Lithuanian defense minister said, whether we decide to fall under the illusion that Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin are going to find a solution for all of us, and that would be a deadly trap, or we will, as Europe, embrace our own economic, financial, and military capacity. There are unanswered questions here. America might not be in Ukraine, but their missiles and military bases, are they next to Ukraine? That would matter. Also, if Trump does the rare earth deal, is Ukraine then allowed to use that money to buy arms from the US? Go Israel style? Like maybe even nuclear arm like Israel? I don't know, because that's how they can get America involved. Okay, so that's the context I wanted to show. I'll play John Bolton as well. Let's play John Bolton. He wasn't thrilled.
I think we know exactly what's going to happen. President Trump has effectively surrendered to Putin before the negotiations have even begun. The positions that Defense Secretary Hegseth announced in Brussels, which I'm sure I'd be stunned if Trump didn't convey them directly to Putin in their phone call, constitute terms of a settlement that could have been written in the Kremlin. Maybe they were written in the Kremlin and got out in propaganda channels. But it's a complete reversal of the U.S. and NATO position on a number of issues. For example, up until today, the official American position was that Ukraine should be returned to full sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's gone. The question of NATO membership as far back as 2008 had been that ultimately Ukraine would become a NATO member. That doesn't look like that's around anymore either. Putin has scored a whole series of victories today. It's hard to encompass them all, but I think one, in addition to these substantive concessions, is that he has now, it seems, exactly what he wants. Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. He wants to negotiate with Trump because he thinks he'll get more out of him, and he's absolutely right.
And Bolton also said the ramifications of this went further than just in Ukraine.
Because what Hegseth and Trump did today was not only blow up the NATO position on Ukraine, they blew up a thing called the Belavasia Accords that Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia signed in December of 1991 that broke up the Soviet Union along the lines of the internal republics. So it means that not only is unprovoked aggression by Russia against Ukraine now okay, every other former republic in the Soviet Union is vulnerable to the same thing without any indication that the U.S. will do anything about it. And I think the people who are paying the closest attention to this outside of in Ukraine are in Beijing, where they see the United States unwilling to act against unprovoked aggression in the center of Europe. What are they thinking now about Taiwan?
So Bolton's not happy. Zelensky's definitely not happy. It looks like Trump has just swung all the way back to Russia. And then Hegseth gets up the next day and just walks it all back.
Why not invoke Article 5 then for the NATO peacekeeping forces that could potentially be deployed? How does that deter President Putin?
Well, I would say, I want to be clear about something as it pertains to NATO membership not being realistic outcome for negotiations. That's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of a coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations, which are led by President Trump. All of that said, these negotiations are led by President Trump. Everything is on the table in his conversations with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. What he decides to allow or not allow is at the purview of the leader of the free world, of President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do, what will be in or what will be out, what concessions will be made or what concessions are not made. I can look, as our team has, of what's realistic, likely on an outcome. I think realism is an important part of the conversation that hasn't existed enough inside conversations amongst friends. But simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, is not a concession to Vladimir Putin. It's a recognition of the hard power realities on the ground after a lot of investment and sacrifice, first by the Ukrainians and then by allies, and then a realization that a negotiated peace is going to be some sort of demarcation that neither side wants. But it's not my job as the Secretary of Defense to define the parameters of the President of the United States as he leads some of the most complex and consequential negotiations in the world.
Elle, what is going on?
I mean, look, trying to find a terribly coherent strategy and understanding of this. Actually, I mean, look, speaking of Russia, I'm often reminded of the late Tsar Nicholas II, who was overthrown in the Bolshevik Revolution. It used to be said of him that the two most powerful people when he was in charge of Russia were the Tsarina and whoever last spoke to Tsar Nikolai. And sometimes I do wonder with Trump's strategy, if it's just that, I wouldn't be surprised if Raytheon or some weapons manufacturers had managed to get a pro-Ukraine guy into his advisor group, and then now it's swung back to some other people. It is difficult to make sense of. I suppose the way that I kind of like to think of it is that he really just is a great power guy. Like I think, what I sort of said before about growing up in understanding kind of mafia and the way that, certain elements of New York is run. I really just think he's only interested in talking to the big dogs. He's, as much as he's always sort of attacking China, he loves talking about President Xi. He loves talking to President Xi. He loves talking to Putin. And then if you even think about, his very, bizarre obsession with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Why does he consider him an equal? It's because he's got nukes. And so I think he's only really interested in dealing with the big dogs, and very clearly has no time for multilateral institutions, for traditional allies, and things like that. Ben Aris, who is the editor of B&E IntelliNews, who does a lot of, he's a former Russia correspondent and does a lot of business reporting and stuff like that. He's a really, really interesting and smart guy to listen to on a lot of this stuff. And he made the very good point the other day that he thinks that Trump really wants to do a mega deal with Russia at the moment. So do Ukraine, Syria, Gaza, sort of wrap it all up into one thing, and then move on to the idea of halving global military spending, which he has been talking about doing with China and Russia. So I think that perhaps if we can, if we start to think about the deal in those terms of you can see something that we might be able to craft as saying that it's a strategy. But it is, look, it's going to be ugly. There's no way that Putin is ever going to give up Crimea. I think that's the big thing. Whatever concessions there might be, happening, and now Zelensky's saying they're not going to participate in these talks. Starmer in the UK has said that they're willing to commit troops for peacekeeping troops, although again, I mean, just going back to the point that America actually has been making for some time, as you pointed out, is that Europe, I mean, how's Europe going to pay for it? How are they going to mobilize? These are very, very wealthy liberal democracies. How are you going to get people who are doing law degrees to sign up for the military? There just isn't, like, where are you going to find 100,000 troops in as much as England has many, many problems at the moment, where are you going to find 100,000 people and pay for them to go and do this stuff? It's really going, and also how are you going to tell a country that you've just said, just almost 2 decades now of just constant austerity, and saying that, when grandma slips and falls, well, she's just got to wait 8 hours for the ambulance to come for her broken hip. But we're going to find money to go and, give peacekeepers to Ukraine. So, I mean, it is very classic Trump, I guess. All of this is to say, which is it's going to be causing everyone else a lot more problems to keep up with his whims and what they've decided to do. But I think this is one thing we certainly, we see a lot of twists and turns with Trump, and a lot of, whoever spoke to him last feeding him some new information. But it seems to me that there is something, the US support for this war is going to end.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are right now trying to work out what on earth they're going to be doing about it.
As certainly the case. Well, I mean, you can see what Europe's been talking about. I mean, you raise a great point about the 20 years of austerity and then turning around and asking them to swallow a bunch of bombs. Yeah, like a military expansion. Because that looks like that's what Europe's doing. Like, did you see that statement put out by France, Germany, UK, Poland, Italy, and Spain? We are ready to enhance our support for Ukraine. We commit to its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity in the face of Russia's war of aggression. We share the goal to keep supporting Ukraine until a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace is reached, a peace that guarantees the interest of Ukraine and our own. We're looking forward to discussing a way ahead together with our American allies. Our shared objectives should be put to Ukraine in a position of strength. Ukraine and Europe must be part of any negotiations. Ukraine should be provided with strong security guarantees. A just and lasting peace in Ukraine is a necessary condition for a strong transatlantic security. We recall that the security of the European continent is our common responsibility. We are therefore working together to strengthen our collective defence capabilities. Sounds like they're going on their own. That would take a lot of money.
It would, and a lot of cooperation, and all of these countries are dealing with very strong insurgent, nationalist, right-wing populist parties who have a lot in common with Trump and Putin and Musk and all these people who are obviously going to pick up this issue, and it's going to be a threat. I mean, Germany has an election in 6 days.
Yeah.
And now suddenly, where the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the far-right populist party, have already, made things like Ukraine, a big issue. If this is suddenly, dumped in the lap of the, sort of defenders of liberal democratic status quo, how are they, going to deal with this? I don't pretend to be any sort of expert on German politics, but I imagine it's sort of a nightmare scenario for a lot of traditional parties there and leading up to the election. I mean, one interesting thing I often recommend, we always talk about Ukraine and Russia when I'm on, and the guy I often recommend reading, Mark Galeotti, he wrote a big piece on this for the Times, the Times of London at the weekend. And he actually made the interesting point that the Russian war mobilization was really creaking. It looks like they were going to hit really intense production and manufacturing issues in 2026. Recruitment has really tailed off and is massively falling behind. And also just the perpetual issue that there's only so long that people want to see body bags coming home. So, I mean, I think it very much would suit Russia to put an end to this. And, they obviously would want to do so on their terms. And as I mentioned, I can't see any conceivable way that they are that they're going to give up Crimea. But yeah, I mean, the real issue now is how seriously Europe is going to take over sort of custodianship, I guess you'd say, of NATO. I mean, that also leads to other issues. I mean, Turkey is the second biggest military in NATO, and they've just basically sponsored the takeover, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. And so again, I think that Ben Arris's point that I mentioned earlier, that Trump is potentially looking to do some sort of mega deal, sounds fairly on the money to me. I imagine that Erdogan's the kind of guy that he would get on with. And sort of be able to come to an understanding or break some bread with. So, yeah, look, I wish I had answers and knew what to say. But again, my summation of everything that we talk about today is just, it's very, very grim, very, very grim times. And that's my comprehensive analysis. It is grim.
That is fair enough. Just a few loose ends. I'll just before we wrap up, also on the point about the budgeting, like the asking Granny to take a hit so you can buy more weapons. At the Munich Security Conference, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, made an interesting concession. She wants to allow governments to increase their defence spending without violating the EU's budget deficit rules. They have very strict rules on how big your deficit can be. And that's why they have all this austerity. And she wants to exempt defence spending. So you have a situation where people can just spend as much as they want on bombs, but they're going to be penny pinching on hospitals and on cops and on education. And that could be a very interesting situation. To what you were saying.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm certainly not an economist. But I mean, traditionally, I suppose military spending is a kind of is a pretty assured form of Keynesianism, right? So I don't know. I imagine that if people worked out ways to, if they can do it domestically, it might be sort of ways to stimulate their own economies. But I don't know if that's drawing too long a bow.
And the other quote I wanted to throw out is from Zelensky a few weeks ago. There are voices which say that Europe could offer security guarantees without the Americans. I always say no. Security guarantees without America are not real security guarantees. So it's interesting. It might be the only thing might be the only kind of security guarantee he can get. So
yeah, and I mean, just on that, I mean, obviously, there's he'd want to be watching the back of his head for a while. You'd have to think he's a fairly ripe assassination target, and I don't just mean from Russia. I mean, he has had to inevitably, as you would in leading a war effort when your country's been invaded. But he has, he did sack sort of his big general a while ago. He has. Suspended a lot of laws and elections and things like that, and will certainly have a lot of internal enemies. And there's, inevitably in these sorts of things, if he does sit down and try to do a deal, there will be a sort of a hard right, I suppose, or some military figures who might be trying to coup him. It's going to be a pretty unpleasant time for him to try and navigate all of this. Because it sounds like he's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't.
And my final thought, bringing it back to America, was when Hegseth walked back the day after his little speech about Ukraine and Europe, and he was doing, I was just spitballing, like as if he was being a pundit or something back on Fox News, going, I was just having a thought, I was just saying what's realistically going to be happening, but that's not limiting Trump in any way. He could do anything. Who knows what he'll do? He'll do anything. Who knows? Well, he's doing that. He looked like a doofus, right? And a lot of people were going, we're having a go at him as being incompetent, and alcoholic, all the rest of it. But you notice how he wasn't even really answering the question? The question that was asked wasn't really inviting that answer. He came wanting to give that answer. Whatever the first question he got, he was going to give that answer, clearly. What that tells you is that he was told to do that. Now, let's have a look back at what he said the day before, when he was just spitballing. He didn't talk about what will happen or what should happen. He talked about what must happen. He was very definitive about how America must not be involved and that NATO must not be involved and the Ukrainian borderlines must not be returned. Like, he used the word must over and over again. Once again, that's not the words of someone spitballing. He was told what to say to deliver a message, and he delivered it. And the next day, he was told to deliver a different message. P. Hegseth may be a lot of things. One thing which he is not is obstreperous. He is very compliant to Trump. And so the confusion there, I don't blame P. Hegseth for it at all. I think he did exactly what he was meant to do. I think the confusion is Trump's. And so I come back to what you've been saying. I got no idea where this is going. It's just grim.
Indeed. Oh, also, just quickly, there was Hegseth's speech watered. You know how they often pre-release the speech to the press?
Yeah.
The original speech they released to the press, he then had watered down some of the comments when he actually gave the speech. And then there was the walk back and things like that. So there's obviously some sort of, 12-dimensional chess or whatever that they think that they're playing here for whatever reason. And yeah. It's grim.
It's grim. Okay, we can settle on that. If I was a bit suicidal in terms of hits, I'd call this podcast "It's Grim," but I don't think that's the way to get people to watch it. So
No.
I will not do that. But thank you so much, Elle. I did go a little bit over time here.
That's all right.
But, I really, really appreciate you as always, and thank you very much for being with us on this cozy Sydney evening.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure. And yeah, really always love hearing. A lot of peppers often get in touch and say hey and ask questions. And yeah, I just think it's a really nice little community you've built. So yeah, to the two people who are still watching and media watch.
That's very nice.
Thank
They
you
are
very much
wonderful.
for having us.
They are
Yeah.
a wonderful community, and please get in touch with Elle if you got any questions about anything. As you can see, she doesn't bite. Till next time, Elle.
See you, mate.
Stay peppy.